That's looking much better. No overhanging timber, nice and smooth and well-defined corners. Hi there, Colin Klipik here. Astute viewers of my previous video on how to make a corner half-lap joint would have noticed that there was a little bit of overhanging timber after the glue had dried on the joint. That means that the joint isn't really quite finished and needs a bit of adjusting. The purpose of this video is twofold. Number one, I want to show you 3 quick methods for how to deal with that. There are many. And number two, how do you deal with questions from students about problems like that? What kind of approach do you want to develop in your students when it comes to problem solving? Do you just give them the easy solution and say, off you go, you'll be fine? Or do you steer them towards something that needs a little bit more practice and a little bit more work, but generally lifts the quality and pushes them more towards a precision result? One is harder than the other. Which one do you choose? Well, let's take a look. So here we are at the vise. This is the edge that I was talking about. In fact, the real edge is actually this one here, but I did a bit of finishing before, and when I filmed that it was a little bit out of focus. So I'm just going to do this again, and we're just going to pretend that this is the actual edge that was sticking out. There are a couple of different ways that students will want to do this. Probably the first thing that they'll say is, "Sir, can I just sand it down?" Well, you can, but sanding to remove materials to get a nice clean-edged joint is probably not the first thing that you'd want to do. It's the easiest thing to do. A student will just grab a piece of sandpaper, dodgy sandpaper like this, and then they'll just go for it, and it'll just give them something to do. And often that's the easy reaction. Yeah, just sand it, you'll be fine. But is it really going to give you a good result? Well, probably not. Let's have a look. On first inspection, you might think, well, that actually looks all right. But the tendency is to get the sanding block and start to round the corners. When you've gone to all this effort to use straight square timber and to make a really nice square joint, you don't want to end up rounding the corners. So sanding it down is an easy solution, and it's easy just to say to students, yeah, off you go. But it's not great. The other thing is that students will say, oh, can I file it? And you go, well, you can, but you get similar problems. Have a look. If you can actually keep the file flat, it's not so bad. But generally the tendency is that files will want to do this, and you'll end up again with rounded corners. Now, let's not forget here, this is woodwork, and so there'll be many opinions about this, but this is all about teaching methods. So you've got 2 methods here which are kind of okay, but not great. The preferred method, I think, is to use a blade and use a jack plane like this, because this is going to give you a nice flat sole to work from, and you're going to end up with a nice square corner. Now the thing is, you're going to actually be planing over end grain here, which is much trickier than planing with the grain or along the grain, and it requires practice, and it requires a really super sharp plane blade. I just happen to have one here, and I think it's actually going to give a superior result. Let's have a look. And you can see here that I've got nice shavings. Well, it's a little bit hard to see. But the way to tell whether you've got a sharp blade is if you're getting shavings, well, then you've got a nice sharp blade. If you get dust, then your blade is not sharp. But this will give you a nice smooth square cut, which you can then finish off with a little bit of sanding. So the sanding just takes a little bit of the roughness off here, but then doesn't encroach on these sides. Now, look, this takes more practice, it takes more skill, it means you've got to maintain your tools a little bit better, and you'll probably get a little bit of pushback from your students because they'll go, oh, that's too hard, I really just want to sand it down. Well, again, yeah, you can, and if you want to get the students out of your hair, that's what you'll say quickly. Yeah, just sand it, and then go off and do something else. But the question you've got to ask yourself is, what kind of long-term culture do you want to develop in your classroom? What kind of long-term approach do you want to have with your students in terms of how they view their work and what they're willing to do and what effort they're willing to go to in order to produce quality work? Is it the right thing to do to try the more difficult thing first, or to try and practice and hone that difficult skill for the sake of longer-term benefit? I think it is. So there you have it. That's now a much nicer result. There's no overhanging edge, and when I run my finger along there, it's nice and smooth, and the corners are still nice and well defined, and everything looks great. The thing to remember from this video is that it's not so much about the technicality of what we've just done, although that is important, but it's mostly about what do you say to students when they come up to you with a problem like this and they are looking for a solution. Do you just take them down the easy route and say, yeah, it's all right, just sand it, it'll be okay? Or do you just let them experiment and watch them do things that you know are probably not going to work? Or do you steer them towards the things that require a little bit more precision and practice, but that you know are going to do much better in the long run? I would go with the third. It takes more work in the beginning, and you're probably going to get a little bit of pushback from your students as well. They'll go, oh, can't I just sand it? Well, you could, but you've got to keep an eye on the longer term. I think it's going to be better for you because it just raises the expectation of quality. It raises the level of discipline in your class. Just the overall conduct and everything just gets better. It really is worth the effort. I strongly encourage you to give it a try.